Or I printed things out, but apparently not. All right. Usually, when you get this close to graduation, right, ninth grade, that sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. Well, you got to stay motivated, especially when we're doing math, right? Math. Next year, you're gonna be taking chemistry. For those of you that set up good habits, right? I mean, like you do your homework all the time. You study for tests. You kind of know how to study for tests. You're gonna find out that sophomore year is no, all the teachers say, oh, next year is when it gets hard. Okay, every teacher says that, right? It's not that they're lying to you. It's just that you start getting used to the difficulty of school. I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, you can talk to any sophomore this year. Chemistry will be the hardest class you take next year. It won't be geometry. Some of you will. I get some weird things that happen in geometry. I will get the kid that literally was weak at algebra or didn't. You would think that they were like, if you stack intelligence from right to left, from lowest to highest, you would think this kid was way over here, and it turns out they were just bored and they didn't really want to do the work. And then all of a sudden, geometry, because it's so different than Algebra 1. It's not what you think it is. It's logic. The whole thing is every problem is I don't want to say a word problem, but every problem is a puzzle that you got to solve. It's different. And I'll get kids that do very well, and I'll have A students that don't get A's. Right? I'll have kids that will get a solid A in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and they'll be a B student in geometry because it's a different kind of math. Some kids do very well at it. I'll just say most kids, geometry it's not like chemistry where you're like, well, I know I'm lost. I'm really lost. Sure. You'll sit in a geometry classroom and think you know what's going on, and then I'll give you the question. You're like, well, I don't know what to do. And it's kind of like that. I'm way off track. Chapter 12 is it's got a bunch of graphing as well too. Graphing calculators are cool, and will certainly tell you the graphing calculator will tell you every answer as well too. Just be careful. You got to be able to do this stuff by hand. All right, so here we go. Homework, copy down. I swear I printed this stuff out. No, it's not. They should have been over there. Now, Christopher. I like this. Mr. Shorty, get yourself a planner. Rylan? No way. Can I go with you? Can I get some water? Mr. Shorty, can I get some water? I was like, I came back. Get your stuff down first. Okay. 70 degrees. No, we're not having this. Why do we have to do yeah, somebody look at the written exercises. For some reason, I didn't put the word written. I haven't got one back there. Should be written. The only other time it's not written is when these are not word problems, so it's going to be written. All right. So when we start something new, and today is something brand new, you got to focus. You got to change from I'm paying more attention to the person next to me than I'm paying attention to the board. I get to sit through, because I also walk in on the history class for 10th graders like the last 5 minutes. So I get to hear what they're, and I'll just say that 10th grade history is, it's for me, it's a college level course. It's like, no, it's exactly what I remember history in college was. It wasn't like the high school I went to, where it was easy stuff. It's challenging material. If you like history, it's very interesting, but it's a lot of note taking. Your ability to sit there and focus and listen to a lecture, take notes that you need to, is one of the things hopefully you develop this year. Here we go.
You should walk into our class one time. No, we got yoga.
I get to hear about your class every day at lunch. Right.
Really? Are they really taking class? What did they say about us?
All the kids that were here last year, I'll just say, I think you're much better behaved than you were last year.
Really? I think I'm better.
Last year, last year, absolutely, you were the main topic of the entire school.
We
Yeah.
built a reputation for this class last
But
year.
this year, I've said to all the teachers, I'm like, maybe it was because I had you first period last year and you guys were sleeping. I just said that I thought that they're no more different than the other classes.
Exactly.
They will more quickly get out of control than it. That's the case. If I blink my eyes and keep them closed for 5 seconds, Aiden's going to be hanging from the
It's gonna be
ceiling.
gone. That's gonna be gone.
All right. So here we go.
Run.
Rolling. So we're going to continue with square roots. So last chapter was about doing calculations with square roots. This is about quadratics. The entire chapter is about quadratics. Why are we doing square roots? Well, remember, quadratic means something to the second power. So this is the inverse operation of squaring, which is square rooting. We just did a whole chapter on it. Not to, I know, and I apparently didn't put them out. Not to bore you, but what we did last chapter was we took the square roots and we started talking about the thing underneath the square root symbol. The symbol is called the radicand. Radical symbol, the thing underneath of it is called the radicand. Just words, you don't need to write that part down. And what square roots do, it basically asks what times itself is the radicand. In other words, what number times itself is 9? Well, we know that to be 3, right? 3 times 3 is 9, so 3 squared is 9. And what we said before is we said that squaring and square root are inverse operations, like adding, subtracting, or multiplying, dividing. They undo each other. So in red here, those two things cancel each other out, which is why the answer to the square root of 9 is 3. Now that was the start of last chapter. You just did a whole chapter on it, and you guys are good at this. But I do want to point out that there are some nuances in square roots in case you forgot. The first one I want to point out is the square root of 1 is 1, right? We never had a single question on that last time, but you can get the square root of 1. Perfect squares, hopefully by now you have these memorized. This was also one that you didn't see, but you will see this chapter. I didn't once give you the square root of 0 last chapter, but I will this time. What's the square root of 0?
0.
Okay, no big deal. What's the square root of negative 16, Aiden?
I don't know. 8.
Because 8 times 8 is negative 16.
Yeah.
Ooh, negative 4.
Because negative 4 times negative 4 is negative 16.
That's what I just thought.
So what's the answer?
Positive 4.
No.
Can you continue your thought? Because you're on the right track.
One of them. A negative 4 it is number 4.
Yeah, but it's what times itself is this number?
I don't know. I don't know how to find the 2 negatives again.
What's negative 4 times negative 4?
Negative 16.
Not negative 16. So give me 2 numbers multiplied by themselves. It's negative 16. Riley, go ahead and tell me the answer.
no answer.
There's no answer to that, at least until you get to junior year. Junior year, you find out this has an answer, but for this year and for next year, we literally write no solution. There is no number multiplied by no real number. And I truly mean real number, realizing the real numbers. Algebra 2 is when you're introduced to this thing, maybe if we have time in geometry. But Algebra 2 is when you're introduced to imaginary numbers, literally, these numbers that are imaginary, believe it or not.
Can you do math?
You do, and your calculator can be put into imaginary number mode. And it will be when you take Algebra 2 and pre-calculus, calculus, and you go higher. So there is an answer to that. Please stop throwing paper. When the negative is on the outside, though, we read this negative as subtract. So subtract the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is, so this means subtract 4 or negative 4. Everything there we're going to be using today, right? But the nice thing is that, well, that's way easier than what we had last chapter. Okay. All right, so think about this. The square root of 9, well, 3 times 3 is 9. Now you gotta go back previous slide. No answer, right? But there is another number times itself that's 9. What else times itself is 9?
Negative 3.
Negative 3, right? So if we go in this direction, the square root of 9, well, 3 is an answer. If we go in this, if we square 3, we get back to 9, right? 3 squared is 9, inverse operations. We'll be solving equations like this, except that's not an equation. So today we're going to be solving equations, right? Except the equations are going to look like that, right? Or like this. right? You've already solved equations that look like this. No big deal. X is equal to
9.
X is equal to 2, right? You've solved equations like this before. This chapter, this whole chapter, solving quadratic. These are linear equations, x to the first power. All the ones we're going to be solving today, x is going to be to the second. You're like, no, x to the first power. But remember, when you square this, you get x squared. So we are going to be solving the entire chapter. That's literally, the entire chapter is just simply about solving equations, except they're going to be quadratics. Okay. You're like, wait a minute, this isn't even an equation. There's no equal sign. True. So we're going to have an equal sign. We've dealt with both of these before, way back chapter 5, quadratics. We factored them. We expanded them. We did a binomial times a binomial. But we ended on factoring. That's the only thing I don't like about our book, is because this chapter really fits well into that previous chapter where we factored, and they don't do it that way. We'll be solving this one today, by the way. And it turns out to be not too big of a deal. All right, so let's see how this works. So it turns out, though, that there are two numbers that when you square are 9. What are those two numbers? That when you square, you get the number 9. So it turns out that we have to deal with this issue, is that when you square something, when you square a negative, you get a positive. When you square a positive, you get a positive. So it turns out that this equation doesn't have one answer. It actually has two answers, right? Because 3 times 3 is 9, and so is negative 3 times negative 3. So how do we get around this algebraic? When we solve an equation, now you got to really pay attention. So how do we do this? So it turns out that when you solve quadratics, when it says solve the equation, you have to understand, just for quadratics, that when you have a quadratic, you have to consider the positive and negative answer. And then it gets more complicated as we move on. Okay? How do you write your answers? Well, there's two ways. You can literally write, they use braces when they have more than one answer. So you usually write x equals braces as your answer. They can also, because some mathematicians are truly lazy, they put x equal to plus or minus 3. Now you can only use that if it literally is positive and negative, right? Is the same. If it's negative 2 and positive 4 are the answers, you can't put plus or minus 2, 4. You got to put negative 2, positive 4. You'll see that one. Not today, though. Okay. So here we go. Solutions to quadratics. So solutions to quadratic. When you have an equation, is an equal sign, right? And you have a quadratic, means x is to the second power, and you solve this. I'm trying to get rid of the 2. Well, how do you get rid of squaring? How do you d square? You take the square root. So to d square, perfectly fine, you take the square root. Now remember, whatever you do to one side, you do the other side. So when you take the square root of a variable, here comes the kicker. You ready? Whenever you take the square root of a variable, the thing on the other side becomes positive or negative. So when you do this process, this is how you get rid of that 2. Take the square root of both sides. When you write your answer, you got to put a plus or minus. Why? Because there's two things that are squared that are k. The positive and the negative, whatever it takes to get to k. So I'm going to back up. Whenever you get this equation, you're going to get it every single problem tonight for homework. Whenever you get to this step, you're like, okay, I'm on my last step. Take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of both sides, most people will not literally write this because they're like, okay, I know what happens. It turns into x is equal to plus or minus the square root of k. Now, there's going to be a number here that you're going to have to deal with, but it's just going to be a number. Could be a perfect square, could be a non-perfect square. You might have to reduce it. You might leave it the same. And it gets more complicated. You're going to need to write this one down. This equation right here has 3 possible outcomes. First off, if k is a positive number, so let me give you a positive number. If it's 4, the answer is plus or minus 2. Because the square root of 4 is 2. So if k is a bigger than 0, to include decimals, to include fractions, whatever, right, Aiden, right. If k is bigger than 0, you get 2 answers, plus and minus. 2 solutions. X squared is equal to 9. Guess what the 2 answers are? Plus or minus 3. All I'm doing is taking the square root of both sides. You're like, is that all we're doing today? You're sort of. That's if k is greater than 0. What happens if k is equal to 0? What's the square root of 0? So how many answers is that? If x squared is equal to 0, you don't put plus or minus 0. There's just 0. If k is a positive value, bigger than 0, you get 2 answers. Take the square root of 9, whatever that is, plus or minus 3. If k is equal to 0, life is nice, right? Just one answer, and you will get 0 frequently. Like, well, geez, why couldn't they give us those problems all the time? What happens if k is negative?
No.
Why?
Because it's imaginary.
You can't, at least not this year. You can't take the square root of a negative number. So if you get, now look at this carefully what it says. It says x squared is equal to negative 4. So to get rid of the square root, or square, we take the square root of both sides. When you try to take the square root of negative 4, there's no answers until you're a junior in high school. Or for those of you taking Algebra 2 next year, you'll learn. Okay, this is key critical. I just gave you one of, an infinite number of possible, although there's only one answer that has 1, 0, or one answer, and that's when x squared is equal to 0. There's an infinite number of the top one, there's an infinite number of the bottom one, the middle one, there's only one. When x squared is equal to 0, you put 0 and you're done with it. Really, all you got to worry about is understanding the first one. Technically, if you put plus or minus 0, well, that's still 0. This is the one that you'll have a couple tonight for homework. When you get to the last step, we'll do a couple today. When you get to the last step and it says x squared equals to any negative number, you're done. Finished. Today for homework, we're going to be solving that right there. So all we're doing is taking the square root of both sides and we're done. Pretty much. There's a couple nuances, but pretty much that's what we're doing. Questions? All right. As always, we're going to start really easy and we'll ramp up the difficulty. Okay. Solving quadratics. Tristan, what's the answer? So is x by itself? What's attached to it? How do we get rid of that 2? Because we get rid of squaring by division. How do we d-square? Literally, what did I say the last 5 minutes? And let's be careful. I understand she said d squared, and I agreed, and I started. There's no word of d squared, right? But it's the right idea. We don't d square. How do we get rid of squaring? What's the inverse of squaring? There's no d squaring.
I don't know.
I created a monster. Square root.
Actually,
I know, yeah, but I agreed. I was like, oh, that's pretty nifty. Let me use that word. Now I'm gonna have people think that's actually a word. The inverse of squaring is square rooting. The inverse of addition is multiplication. Inverse addition is subtraction. Inverse multiplication is division. The inverse of square is square rooting. When you get this, you're going to take the square root of both sides. But the previous slide said, if that's the case, k is positive, how many answers are we going to get? 2. What are the 2 answers? So what are the 2 answers? Negative positive what number? And you're done. We take the square root of both sides, but remember, when you take the square root of a variable that's being squared, you have to consider the fact that there's a positive and negative answer. There's 2 numbers that are squared that are 49. 7 times 7 is 49, and negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. Rylan, you awake? Okay. Is it literally going to be that easy? Yes, it is literally going to be that easy. There's going to be plenty of homework that's just like that. Okay. I'm still picking on Tristan or no?
No.
Yes.
No. No.
How do we get x by itself?
easy, bro.
So what's the answer? Say it.
Yeah.
I can't make it challenging because it's not that challenging. Now, why isn't it plus or minus 0? Because there's no positive or negative 0. There's just 0. 0 is neither positive or negative. It's the only number that has no sign, right? It's just 0.
I got water now.
How about we stay in class? Let's learn it so that you're not lost. All right.
Where are we eating lunch?
Who am I picking on now?
Landon.
All right.
Oh, I know.
Landon, what do you think?
Nothing.
Is x by itself?
No.
So what do we have to do to both sides?
D square it.
How did I do that? Yes, we need to take the square root of both sides, but what's the problem here, Landon? because you said there was no answer.
It's a negative number.
This is the one you gotta, Kaylee, you gotta be ready for this to happen, right? You get something squared and it's equal to a negative number. You can stop it as soon as you get to that step. There's no reason to go on. As soon as it says x squared equals negative, now be careful. There could be other stuff here, but if it literally says x squared equals negative number, you're done. There's no answer, no solution. Sure, you can take the square root, but when you take the square root of a negative number, your calculator says no way, right? No answer. All right. That is the symbol for no solution. It's called the NULLSET, null set. Null means nothing is in the set of numbers that are the answers. Okay. All right. Those are really easy, and yes, every problem that we do eventually gets down to that step right there. Okay. It was too easy, so let's do a more challenging one. So challenge accepted. All right, here we go.
Challenge.
Anybody? All right, this one's complicated, but let's think about it. We always work from outside to inside, right? So what's on the outside that we need to get rid of? We need to get rid of the 2, right? So how do we get rid of the 2? We take the square root of both. Everybody's with me? We're going to take the square root of both sides. Why am I getting rid of 6? Because, by the way, that's not really a 6, that's a 36. Because when you square 6, you get 36. So could I subtract 36 from both sides? Oh, you could, but let's not do that. Let's get rid of the square first.
So we're going to square root it.
So we're going to take the square root of both sides, but when you take the square root of both sides, is that positive or negative?
Negative.
Positive or negative?
Sorry.
So therefore, it's going to be plus or minus the square root of 64. When I take the square root of that whole honking thing on the left, that's what's going to get rid of the 2. But on the other side, because there's a variable right here, I'm going to get a plus or minus. Where did the 8 come from? Anybody lost with that? Okay. All right. Up to this point, life was easy. This is the only one that's weird, and I wanted to put this one first. Okay, you ready? It says x plus 6 is equal to plus or minus 8. How many equations are there? What 2 equations do you see? So what 2 equations do you see? Say it a little bit slower so maybe hear it.
X plus 6.
Say it.
Yeah,
the 2
you have
equations.
x plus 6 and you have plus or minus.
So what are the 2 equations?
X plus 6 equals 8, x plus 6 equals 9.
Yeah, we've seen that before, right? Where we had absolute value equations and we solved them, and it broke up into 2 equations, one positive, one negative. Same basic idea. This says x plus 6 equals positive 8 or x plus 6 equals negative 8. So I get 2 equations from it. Yeah, you got to write both equations.
Why?
Because it's 2 equations.
But why not just do like that?
You could, because once you do a bunch of these, you kind of know how it goes, and a lot of people will do that. You just got to be careful that you don't.
Because that one, how we want that not having an answer.
Well, what do we got to do on this one on the left?
On that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you subtract it?
Okay. So we get,
X equals 2.
and on the one on the left? No.
X equals negative
12.
Negative 2.
Yo, I gave close. I said 12.
Right?
What are we doing to both sides?
Oh,
I got it.
Oh, so it's gonna be negative like four, I don't even know, like 4.
Like what she said about 20 seconds ago, which was?
Negative, or no, it was just 14.
Oh, you said it right. Negative 14. All right. Now, clearly, it's not a plus or minus answer. Like, it's not plus or minus 2. It's a positive 2 and negative 2 completely different numbers. I mean, okay, plus or minus 3, you got a 3 and a negative 3. Okay, kind of makes sense. I get 2 wildly different numbers. The claim is both of these make that true. We're claiming that the answer to this is either positive 2 or negative 14. Both of those are solutions, right? And this is how you'd write the solution. So let's go back to the original equation just for giggles, and let's just see if we can see if it's true. Let x be 2. What's 2 plus 6? 8 squared.
64.
But it could also be negative 14. What's negative 14 plus 6? No. And what's negative 8 squared? You get 2 completely different answers. They both make the equation true.
What would happen if you just distributed the 2 so you get x squared plus 30?
What do you mean distribute? Oh, you got to be careful. You could do that.
Would you have the same answer?
be careful, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here, not how you have to do this one, harder way of doing it. The problem is when you square this, this is x plus 6 times x plus 6. So you don't get x squared plus 36. You get a 36, you get a 12x, and you get an x squared. And that equals 64.
That's it. You're done.
Now you got to solve that.
Wait, really?
We will do it like this in a couple of days. We're not there yet. Okay? We're going to do it the easy way today. Eventually, starting in about 2 days, we will do this,
Why
but
do you have
not
to do it that way if this was easy?
because other times it will look like this. It won't look like that. And then you have to do it the second way. All right. But today we're going to do it, well, technically the easy way. All right. So we take the square root of both sides. You got to remember that the square root, when you take the square root of a variable, the other side becomes plus or minus. And then we simply do the algebra from that. It gives us two equations, one where the 8's positive, one where the 8's negative. Julie, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Julie, you
Yes?
Julie, breathe.
Hey, the way that we stay on this is that you pay attention, and then when I can ask you a question, you're like, okay, I got this, or no. Because I can always go backwards, but at the end of class, you're like, I didn't get any of that. It's too late at that point. Okay? Make sure you don't let me go too far to where then you're like, I gotta get none of this type stuff. So you're supposed to stop me if we get to a part you don't understand. All right. We better do one of these. All right, everybody write this one down on a piece of paper. The quantity x minus 5 squared equals 4. The quantity, that's how we say parentheses. The quantity x minus 5 squared. Otherwise, we got to say open parentheses, x minus 5, close the parentheses, squared. So just easier to say the quantity x minus 5 squared equals 4. Step number 1, work from outside to inside. Get rid of the square. How do we get rid of the square? Take the square root of both sides. We can because it's positive. If this was a -4, there's no answer. Okay? All right, so we take the square root of both sides. It's going to be a plus or minus 4, though, not just a 4, but what is the square root of 4? So we get plus or minus 2. Does everybody see that? You see where I'm getting this 2 from? Square root of 4 is 2, but it's got to be plus or minus. The square root gets rid of the squaring. Just poof, makes it go away, cancels. How many equations? Now, Rowan said, could we do this all in a head? Yeah, you could. Make sure you're on the ball. I would write it out, but you could. If you're really thinking about it, I would much rather you write it out. You get to algebra 2. Oh, yeah, everybody does it in their head in algebra 2. Like literally, from this step, everybody just writes the answer in algebra 2 and pre-calculus. But when you first learn it, it's worth just writing it out so you don't make a silly mistake. On both equations, though, look, we do the same thing to solve each one. To get rid of minus 5, we add 5 to both sides. So the one on the left, we're going to get x is equal to 7. Careful, the one on the right, we get a 3. So my two answers, now, technically, you could leave that as your answer. We generally always, it's not an ordered pair. I'm not writing a point. It's not an ordered pair. I'm saying that's why I don't use parentheses. Otherwise, it would look like an ordered pair. Braces are used to denote multiple numbers. So 3 and 7 both make that equation true. If I go back to the original, okay? If I go back to the original one, 3 and 7 are supposed to make it true. 3 minus 5 is -2. -2 squared is 4. 7 minus 5 is 2. 2 squared. Both of those numbers make it true. Okay. By the way, that's called a check step. We did it last year. Okay, 3 and 7. Cool. Quick note. Oh, this was a note on check step. Sorry, I just literally just made that. So if you throw both those in, we get 4. All right, the most challenging ones. All right. Why is this one more challenging? Does it say x squared?
Yes. But it has a 3 attached.
It's got a 3 attached to it. So are we going to get rid of the 2 first or the 3?
3.
Which is easier, getting rid of taking the square root or getting rid of the 3?
The 3.
If we take the square root, then you're taking the square root of 3, right? What's the square root of 3? Ugh. Right? So we can get rid of that 3 pretty easy by dividing. Okay, so get rid of the easiest thing first. So we divide both sides. I'll do this one real quick. 3 goes into 10 3 times with 1 left over. So 18. 3 goes into 18, 6. So 30, what, 30? Okay? And then this is where all of a sudden it starts to click and people are like, okay, I get it. I get it. So x equals plus or minus Anna. Sophia, stay with me. So x equals what? Final answer?
Plus or minus.
So most people at this point, because they've seen it 3 or 4 times, are like, I don't want to put that stinking square root symbol, but technically you have to, right? Oh, am I okay with going to the answer from there? I am. Just make sure you understand what's going on here. I am taking the square root of both sides. 36 is positive, so it has 2 answers, plus or minus. Square root of 36 is 6. So it turns out that a 6 and a negative 6 will make that equation. I'm going to stop doing check steps. You can either write the answer like this, or you can write that. Most people kind of write like this because they're there. The book will, sometimes they go back and forth. Sometimes they'll write it like this, sometimes they'll write it like this. All right, is anybody panicking like I'm lost? I don't know what's going on. Like this is where it happens. Like you're either with me and we're ready on to move with challenging things. You're like, no, you lost me 5 minutes ago. Okay, I'm not saying that this was a hard class. It's not, right? All right, really quickly, we can do this one in our heads. The answer is plus or minus what? Okay. Can't do that one in our head. Got to take the square root. We take the square root of both sides. We get x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus, be careful, 5. Now, this is usually what I see after day 1. Nobody writes the square root symbol. If you're going to, I put it right there. Okay. Most people immediately, because they know how it works, right? I would still write that and then write the 2 equations. X plus 2 is equal to 5, and x plus 2 is equal to negative 5. So that's the plus or minus. Subtract 2 from both sides, we get 3 and, careful, negative 7, right? I wasn't claiming you were wrong. I'm saying be careful. I just really caution some people at this state, maybe you want to really do all the work. It is customary, excuse me, it's customary to put the numbers in from least to greatest. Not a requirement, it's just customary. Last one, who can do that whole thing in your head?
10. 10 and negative 10.
See what I mean? You reach a point where all of a sudden it becomes, okay, it's clicking, it's easy. Nathan, what was our first step for this one? What do I need to get rid of to get x by itself? And I got to get rid of the 6, and I also need to get rid of the, okay, which one do you want to get rid of first? How do you get rid of the 6? How is it attached to x? The 6 is attached by squaring? How is the 6 attached to x? Like, is there a plus? Is there a minus? Is there multiplication? Is there a division? Is there a squaring? So how do we get rid of multiplication? Both sides by 6, that gives me 100. What's the square root of 100? And remember that when we take the square root of positive number, there's 2 answers, which is why Sierra said at the very start, oh, it's plus or minus 10. Okay? We feeling confident? They do get a little bit more challenging than this. Okay? These are the tricky ones. You're going the wrong way. You're going the wrong way. Go back, go back. Is he going to win?
He's really bad at bases.
He's an idiot.
God.
He's not gonna win.
Come on, you can do it. You're going the wrong way.
It's like the commercials for games. And they're like, this is impossible. It's like only 1%.
No, the other way.
4 times 7. Exactly. Like match the 2 red or blue.
Oh,
You are the chosen one.
this is taking forever. Oh, no, you were just there.
Well, you're a weird. Okay, he's obviously.
Oh,
He's trolling.
Wait, no.
enough of that. All right.
No.
The tricky ones are the ones where you think, listen, please. The tricky ones are the ones where you, Aiden.
That's my bad. I'll stop.
The tricky ones are the ones where you think you know the answer but they are absolutely trying to trick you. Hey, what does this say? Equals,
Negative 75.
equals.
Negative 75. No.
Immediately you want to say both answers are.
Okay, but that one might be.
You got to be ready. Just because it says equals, notice neither one of these say x squared equals negative 75. If it says x squared equals negative 5, done deal, no answer. But they're going to have other numbers that you got to get rid of first. And you're going to see one of them produces an answer, one of them doesn't. Hey, we get rid of the 3, we're dividing both sides by 3. Answer or not answer? No answer. You can't take the square root of a negative number. What happens over here, though, the first thing I get rid of is negative 3. So what happens when you divide by negative 3? You get that positive, so this one has an answer. Plus or minus 5 for this one. Now, why was that different? It was different because of that negative 3 right here. So don't assume just because it says equals negative, unless it's the last step, that there is no solution. You have to do the other algebra. They're going to sometimes they'll have multiple negative numbers that you got to deal with. Okay. We can also have some adding, subtracting going on that can turn things negative and positive. So don't assume just because it's positive or negative that it has an answer or it doesn't have an answer. Do the algebra first. Okay. Anybody lost on why the one on the left did not have an answer, but the one on the right does? Okay. Hey, lots of things to get rid of. Who am I picking on now?
No, you already picked on me.
All right, Sophia. I got 3 things to get rid of. Look at the X. I got 3 numbers to get rid of. What are the 3 numbers I need to get rid of? Okay. Of those 3 numbers, the 6, the 2, and the negative 16, what's the easiest one to get rid of first? Like the easiest math to do. So let's get rid of the minus 16. How do we get rid of minus 16? Okay. So I added. Notice I skipped the writing plus 16, plus 16. You're at the end of it. You're almost into geometry. Most of us don't do the addition steps ever. We just write the answer. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm not saying it's a great technique if the numbers are ugly. The numbers are ugly. I'm going to write plus 57.2, plus 57.2. But if it's add 16 to 2, no, I'm not going to waste time writing that step. All right, Sophia, what's next? 6 or the 2? Which is the easiest? So divide both sides by 6. Okay, how do we get rid of the 2? I thought it was safer to throw it at Rowan than throw it at. Yeah, I never should have agreed to saying that. Okay. The next math, well, I am your next math teacher, but you're going to have a math teacher and like, who taught you D squaring? You guys won't tell the right story. All right, take the square root of both sides. It's positive 3, so it has an answer. Hey, they don't want you to type that in your calculator. That's the answer. Except you got to add how many answers?
All of them.
You got to add the plus or minus.
The one
Okay.
that you need.
You got to add the plus or minus. The only time you don't add that plus or minus if there's a 0. If there's a negative, there's no answer. But if it's a positive number, even if it's a decimal, small or fraction, it's plus or minus. I can't remember. I didn't look that hard at the homework problems today. You might get a number that you have to fully reduce, like it's square root of 20. You got to do what you did last chapter. Okay. Hey, anybody want to take a guess? You think it's going to have an answer or not have an answer?
It's going. No, no.
Sometimes you can look at it kind of guess, but other times you can't.
No.
If you add 15 and the negative 3 is no longer negative.
So let's add 15 to both sides, and what we get?
12.
We get 12. Now what?
Then you divide by 3 to
Uh,
x squared equals 4.
For those of you that, obviously this is turning into Hannah class again, but for those of you that are sitting there, you're like, I don't know what she's saying. He's agreeing to it, but he's going faster. I'm going faster because my assumption is you're not stopping me, right? If you're not stopping me because you're like, well, yeah, it is that easy. That's great. But if it's not, we don't get to testing. Like, I don't get any of this stuff. You stop the math teacher while you're learning, but you don't understand something. What are you doing? Where did that number come from? Why? I don't get this, right? What are we doing now? Therefore, the answer is plus or minus 2. Chris, you're staring blankly at the wall. Yeah? On this?
Yes.
Piper? Okay. If you understand the steps, we're good, right? Obviously, you can still make a silly math mistake. You add 15 and you get, I don't know, 18 or something like that instead of 12. You can make a silly math mistake. But if you understand the process, as you go on higher level math, if you understand the process, that's guaranteed C. If you understand the process, always, at least if I'm the teacher, you're going to get a C. So when you don't understand the process is the failure. Higher level math, you make mistakes all the time. Just calculations. It throws everything off and makes it horrible. But you got to show that you understand the process. No, you're here. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I got about 3 problems left. Good. All right, Piper, what are we getting rid of first? The 5, the square, or the 2? All right, so let's get rid of the 2. What do we do? Well, we get an even bigger negative or smaller negative number. Now what? We're getting rid of the 5 and the 2. You got to take the square root of 5. You don't want to do that. Always get rid of the easiest thing first. Get rid of the 5. So how do we get rid of that 5? Divide both sides by 5. We get that. Answer or no answer? No answer. Hey, could you have realized this from the start? Would you have to go through all the work if you realized from the start? No. Right? As soon as you better be right though. Don't, oh, I'm pretty sure that one's negative. I mean, you could tell them this one, right? But you got to be 100% sure. Hey, answer, no answer. Answer, no answer. This one has an answer now. Just putting that one negative right there gave me an answer. Okay, so make 100% sure. I've agreed. I mean, I probably would have put no answer right from the start. Just because there's negatives, you got to do the math, right? Answer, no answer. Or can you tell? Okay, some of you can tell. They're usually like, I got to do the math. So add 4 to both sides. Now what? Divide both sides by -2, which turns that into a positive. This one has an answer. Plus or minus 3. Sorry, my mistake. That's a +1 for you. Plus or minus square root of 3. Kaylee? Why do we write the answer like that?
Because we want to.
The other way of writing it would be brace negative square root of 3, comma, positive square root of 3, close your brace. So why do we write like that one? I don't know if it literally is less writing, but it seems like to me it's less writing. All right. The most difficult one is the very last one that we'll do. This one right here. This is more of an honors level question than an average class question. So I'm going to go back to this one. Answer, no answer. This one, notice if this is positive and all these are positive, you're going to get an answer. What are we doing first? Getting rid of the 2 or the 8? Divide 56 by 8 and you get. Okay. Now what are we going to do? Take the square root of both sides. So we get x plus 3 equals, careful, plus or minus the square root of 7. This is going to be an ugly looking answer, but it's the answer. So I got to write 2 equations. X plus 3 is equal to positive square root of 7, and x plus 3 is equal to negative square root of 7. You see? Subtract 3 from both sides, you get your -3. So we get x equals -3 plus square root of 7 or minus square root of 7. Now I think you can see that this is a little bit easier to write than the other one. Okay. Anybody have an idea about this one? I'll just give you a hint. You've seen this before.
Oh, I know what it is.
Wait.
It's been a long time since we've seen that, but we have seen it in this class. This is the big F word. F.
Oh, what?
I got to do the factor, the F word. Does anybody remember how to factor? I need 2 numbers multiplied that are 121 that add up to -22. I need 2 numbers. 1 times 121 is 121, but add these 2. What is it?
Oh wait, what's what I do?
But it's got to add to negative 22.
Two negative one.
Negative
X minus 11
no.
times
Negative
Negative 11, right?
I had it on my paper.
So
16.
this one actually factors to x minus 11 squared.
I know
X
it.
minus 11 times x. And now it looks like a previous one. There is one, I believe, like this on homework. I think it's one. Towards the end. All right. Go get your lunches.
I mean, no, he-
Get over it. I won't.
Yeah, not this time.